Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Dollar Dialogue. Today's episode 37, Malaysia at the Crossroads, Innovation, Investment, and the Quest for Equity with Mr. Hyren Gone. Mr. Hyren is currently a senior at the International School of Kuala Lumpur, ISKL, and he's a Malaysian, and we are very happy to have him here with us today to talk about Malaysia and about the crossroads when it comes to innovation, investments, and the quest for equity. Mr. Hyren, thank you so much for joining us today. Is there anything that you would like to say before we start?
No, of course. Thank you, first of all, Araf Malik and Arab Malik, for inviting me to this podcast. I'm very grateful. And yeah, I hope for a really fruitful and lively conversation with you guys today.
Thank you, Mr. Hyren. Let's start. So Malaysia is a very interesting country. It's an emerging country, and it has a very dynamic economy that blends a strong manufacturing base with palm oil, electronics, and with growing high-tech sectors. It's also positioned geographically in the heart of Southeast Asia, and it is a natural gateway for regional trade, investment, and innovation initiatives. And the nation also faces a pivotal moment where when it comes to policy reforms, global supply chain shifts, and digital transformation coverage to shape its future trajectory. And the overall competitiveness of the economy is buoyed by improvements in infrastructure and educated workforce and significant foreign direct investment in key sectors. Now, talking about innovation in Malaysia, obviously it's a country with a very high-tech, transformative economy. There are rapid expansion in digital sectors, including investments in data centers, semiconductor manufacturing, AI infrastructure, and cloud computing, which are shaping the industry landscape. There are also a lot of major multinational tech companies in Malaysia, such as Microsoft, Google, and ByteDance, which are investing billions, boosting Malaysia's reputation as an emerging tech hub. And there are also initiatives to nurture corporate venture capital (CVC), which are underway with local giants exploring structured investments in startups to drive technological innovation. And the government's strategic roadmaps, including the Malaysia VC roadmap 2024 to 2030, aims to mobilize domestic capital and improve the early stage financial ecosystem. And despite strong innovation outputs, Malaysia it struggles to convert these investments into proportionate innovation outputs, indicating a need to better harness R&D and improve commercialization of technology, like seen in other countries like Singapore. And Malaysia also has a lot of investments, foreign direct investments, and it has witnessed rapid economic growth because of its investments bolstered by both domestic and foreign sources, which underpin its rapid economic transformation. And the influx of FDI is driving key sectors such as semiconductors, renewable energy, and digital infrastructure. And the joint projects such as the Johor Singapore Special Economic Zone also exemplify regional cooperation designed to attract a multi-billion-dollar investment and create jobs. And these initiatives are also part of broader government strategies to reposition Malaysia in the global supply chain, especially amid trends like French shoring, where companies diversify bases away from China. And the recent policy adjustments, which include tax incentives and streamlining foreign ownership regulations, are intended to attract high value investments while ensuring sustainable growth. However, investment strategies also face challenges such as managing environmental impact and ensuring infrastructure such as energy, which is necessary to support the rapid expansion. As for the equity, amid rapid technological and economic changes, the government is striving to ensure that high investment is translate into broader based economic benefits for all Malaysians, and the initiatives target reducing income and regional disparities through state-led funds such as the Khazanah National (EPF) and the Equinus, with that aim to channel returns into public and social development projects. And the legacy of policies like the new economic policy NEP is evolving as Malaysia seeks to balance traditional affirmative action with a merit based approach that encourages innovation and entrepreneurship across all communities. And the reforms are underway to ensure that modern economic policies support both business dynamism and social equity. So, what's your opinion on this topic? The topic of Malaysia at the crossroads, innovation, investments, and the quest for equity. Mr. Hyren, Mr. Ari Malik, or Mr. Shazib Karim?
Yes. First of all, thank you. Thank you for inviting me once again. But Yeah, I've heard your comments, and I'm really pleased to hear the extent of research and information that you've compiled. I agree with like a lot of your points, especially in regards to how Malaysia is at like a very unique position, right? It's not a developed country, a fully developed country like an MEDC per se. However, it's not an LEDC as well. So it's transitioning to become a developed country. However, because of that transition, Malaysia faces many problems such as the middle income trap and various other problems that plague sort of developing countries trying to become fully developed economies. And I think, as you mentioned, there are numerous problems such as social problems, cultural problems that actually affect economic problems. So, as you know, Malaysia is a multicultural society, right? You have the Malays, the ethnic Malays, the ethnic Chinese, and ethnic Indian. So the ethnic Malays make up roughly about 70% of the population, while the Chinese make up 20% and Indians make up around 6%. So we have the majority of the population being Malay, ethnically Malay, and Muslim. However, there still seems to be an imbalance in terms of economic power, as ethnic minorities, such as the ethnic Chinese, actually hold majority of economic power in Malaysia. Like if you look at the top 50 richest Malaysians, just currently, 49 of them are either ethnically Chinese or ethnically Indian. So only one of them is ethnically Malay. So we see this sort of financial and economic imbalance, which also leads to power imbalance. And I think Malaysia has done a lot of policies to try to alleviate this, but some of them have been successful and some of them have not been successful. Yeah, Arif, do you have any comments?
Oh yeah, sorry, apologies. The mic wasn't turning on. So yeah, I definitely agree with Hyren that definitely there's some inequality in Malaysia. But I would briefly like to talk about some of the economic growth in Malaysia that I had actually researched. So Malaysia's GDP has like shown resilient growth with a 5.6% increase in 2021, following a sharp contraction of 5.6% in 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic, according to the World Bank. And obviously, it just kind of shows that the Malaysian GDP has strong resilience. And also looking at the foreign direct investment of Malaysia, if I'm not mistaken, in 2021 it was approximately 8 billion, which is a significant increase from the previous year, according to the UNCTAD. And what stood out to me was the Malaysian government's My Digital initiative, which aims to attract approximately 70 million ringgit in investments by 2025, which underscores the push towards digitalization. So if we are looking at majority of the developed countries in the world, which are located in Europe or North America, we see that majority of these countries are located in the tertiary sector. The economies are heavily digitized, but Malaysia is like still there's a lot of palm oil cultivation. And like even personally, like when I went to Malaysia, for example, in Malacca and like Kuala Lumpur, I was traveling in the highways. I saw a lot of palm trees, and majority of the workers, if I'm not mistaken, are actually from like Bangladesh, India, and or like Pakistan. Like the workers are like like the workers are still working there. So like yeah, based on that, like Malaysian economy is like the economy is strong. It's not that it's not strong, but I think it's still there's still a considerable primary sector involved. And I think the what stood out to me was the government's My Digital initiative, which aims to attract foreign investment towards the technology. And speaking of technology, while researching, I also found that Malaysia ranks like 36th in the global innovation index for 2021, which once again shows like even though like Malaysian economy is not that much heavily invested in technology, it still ranks quite high. And the R&D expenditure for technology has also increased, accounting for around 1.5% of the GDP. And the government also pledged to boost this to 2% by 2025. So I would say for Malaysia, what I really like about it is the fact that the economy is slowly starting to move towards the technology sector, and I think this will definitely help Malaysian economy rise, because currently, like, Malaysia is heavily reliant on banking sector. Like from a personal anecdote, like, before, like, currently most people, like, they go to like Dubai or the UAE for keeping their money, but like 20 years ago, like, it wasn't the case. A lot of Bangladeshi people, like, we actually like, a lot of Bangladeshi people actually used to keep money in Malaysia due to the financial and banking sector. But this has slowly, like, shifted towards Dubai. So I think this is one of the areas that we could look at potentially, why this happened, as for why Malaysia's banking sector slowly started to decline. Like, what was the reason for that?
Mhm. Yeah, that's an excellent point you made. I wasn't aware of that, and I think just even from a personal and economic perspective, the relationship between Malaysia and Bangladesh is very tight, right? Like, both of these countries are brotherly countries. We have, in Malaysia, we have a lot of Bangladeshi foreign workers that come here and work on various different sectors, work on the primary sector, the secondary sector, and even in the tertiary sector. So I think in regards to that, it could also be just the rise of Dubai. We see Dubai as a stronghold in the Middle Eastern and, in fact, the Muslim world. I think Malaysia has some work to do with catching up on its status of being the Muslim world's like premier financial center. Right? You have like now developments of TRX, the Tun Razak exchange. You have the Merdeka Tower that's being built, almost completed. So these infrastructure projects can really channel the financial sector into a more centralized location in KL, in Kuala Lumpur, to provide for more like Islamic banking services, which is a relatively niche market in the scheme of the global financial sector. But yeah, I was wondering, I mean, both Araf and Arif could like answer, but like, what do you guys think is like the relationship between Bangladesh and Malaysia, and how do you think like both countries can leverage that relationship to go further in both of their economic growth?
I think that the relationship between Malaysia and Bangladesh, as you have said, is very brotherly, in the sense that Bangladesh depends on Malaysia for sending workers, because our we currently have a Ministry of Foreign Labor Services. I think it's called. In Bangla, we call it something else, but I think it's called the Ministry of Foreign Labor Affairs, and I think that that's a very heavily important ministry for the country of Bangladesh, because our country, in a way, for foreign reserves like US dollars and foreign exchanges reserves, it depends on the remittances sent by foreign workers, the Bangladeshi workers that are living in foreign countries like Malaysia. And for that reason, I think that the relationship is very warm between these two countries. And I think in the future, I think that relationship is obviously going to improve, and it's going to play a key significant role for not just Malaysia and Bangladesh, but for, because I think that Bangladesh in a way is a bridge between South Asia and Southeast Asia. And I think that since Bangladesh is the easternmost country of South Asia, I think that Bangladesh and Malaysia are obviously going to have a very warm brotherly relationship, which is further going to increase in the future as Malaysia obviously as a country develops, and also as Bangladesh as a country develops. And I think that Bangladesh has a lot of things to learn and from Malaysia, because Bangladesh currently probably is around 50 years behind Malaysia in my estimation, because 50 years ago probably Malaysia looked kind of similar to the way Bangladesh looks like right now. So I think that Bangladesh has a lot of to learn from Malaysia when it comes to governance, when it comes to economic structure, because Malaysia obviously faced rapid economic growth in the 80s and 90s and even in the 2000s. So Bangladesh could learn from it. And I think that Malaysia's established high-tech sector and renewable energy sectors can also be a model for Bangladesh. For example, Malaysian firms could partner with Bangladeshi counterparts to transfer expertise in semiconductor manufacturing or data management sectors. And I think those are very important initiatives. And a few months ago, actually, our interment government, they wanted to be a part of ASEAN. I'm sure, Mr. Hyren, you know about ASEAN, which is the economic alliance in Southeast Asia. And so
Mhm.
our intermittent government, they wanted Bangladesh to be part of ASEAN, and so the country that they approached for this for this plan, and the country that they requested help in, was Malaysia, because again this shows that Bangladesh and Malaysia have a very warm relationship, because out of all the countries in ASEAN, Bangladesh went to Malaysia to seek help and to gain ASEAN membership. So I think that again shows the deep relationship between the two countries. So what's your opinion, Arif or Mr. Shazib, on this Bangladesh and Malaysian relationship?
Yeah, I think the question that Hyren asked is a really important question because oftentimes like Bangladesh is when people think of Bangladesh as ally, they often think about, for example, India. But the reality is like Bangladesh also has other allies, and I think Malaysia is probably one of the strongest allies we have. I think Araf, you talked about the labor migration. So like Bangladesh, as of our current status, like we are one of the largest sources of foreign labor for Malaysia, especially in the sectors of construction, manufacturing, and the palm oil plantation. And the labor migration provides significant amount of remittance inflows to Bangladesh. So clearly, based on that, economically we have a relationship in Malaysia, and also if we look at trade partner, Malaysia is an important trade partner for Bangladesh because the trade primarily involves Malaysian exports of petroleum, electronics, and palm oil to Bangladesh, and imports of textiles and agricultural products from Bangladesh. So clearly, we have a symbiotic relationship with Malaysia. And other than that, I would say one aspect that we haven't particularly talked about here is, I would say, there's also educational and cultural exchange because while I was researching, I found that there's a significant number of Bangladeshi students in Malaysian universities. For example, Monash, for example, and both countries, we share cultural ties through the Commonwealth and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. So clearly, there are scholarship programs in place between these two countries, and also there has been increasing academic collaboration. And I think I think we could do strategic initiatives to leverage our relationship even further. For example, if we look at the bilateral agreements, one of the strategies that we could do is negotiate more comprehensive bilateral trade agreements. For example, we could do a free trade agreement (FTA) or a preferential trade agreement (PTA) to reduce the tariffs and to increase market access of Bangladeshi goods to Southeast Asia through the Malacca Strait, or and likewise Malaysian goods to South Asia through the Bay of Bengal. And other than that, I think we could also do more joint economic projects. I think establishing specific economic zones for Malaysian investors in Bangladesh to focus on our textile industry, for example, could be a potentially lucrative opportunity. But more importantly, I think Malaysia can participate in infrastructure projects in Bangladesh, such as road and bridge construction, power plants, and port development. Bangladesh, I think, is very one-sided when it comes to infrastructure development. We most of the time it's China, but obviously there are other countries as well, other than China, which can also help us. For example, like Malaysia, in terms of infrastructure development, as Malaysia is a prime example of how rapid industrialization occurred and how the country itself, infrastructurally, like they grew at a rapid pace as well. So definitely, there's something to learn here. But I wanted to like hear Hyren's opinion on the ASEAN. Do you think like Bangladesh joining the ASEAN could be potentially lucrative, or for example, Malaysia, or what do you think the ASEAN countries, do you think they would want Bangladesh to be part of ASEAN? For example, I think like Bangladesh has a lot to offer in terms of textiles, and also we have the Bay of Bengal, which is a very important strategic area in terms of global maritime trade.
Yeah, thank you, Arif, for the question. Excellent question. So I think the year of 2025. So this is Malaysia's chairmanship year of ASEAN. So this means that the chairman of ASEAN will be, the chairman of ASEAN will now be based in KL in Malaysia. So I think if Bangladesh were to join ASEAN, this would be the prime time for that to happen. So I think there is definitely a symbiotic relationship, as Arab said, between Bangladesh and Malaysia. We see lots of cultural exchanges. We see even educational exchange being a factor in this relationship. But more importantly, the economics is what drives most of these policies and most of these FTAs, customs unions, etc. at the end of the day. So I think Malaysia and Bangladesh do have a close relationship. However, in regards to other countries such as Myanmar, however, Myanmar, their membership is somewhat contentious right now in ASEAN, but Myanmar, Indonesia, Thailand, um, I'm not completely sure about their relationship with Bangladesh. However, there does seem to be some tension in regards to the Rohingya migrant issue, right? You have lots of Rohingya migrants fleeing to Bangladesh because of the civil war in Myanmar, and I think the Burmese government will not, view this situation happily if there's no sort of diplomatic negotiation. And likewise, other governments may not see the situation favorably in Myanmar's side because they were the instigators of their own civil war. So I think there is a bit of global geopolitics that needs to be considered in terms of Bangladesh's accession into ASEAN. I mean, we've also seen ASEAN be a very bureaucratic and slow organization, right? Because, for example, East Timor. East Timor is on track to joining ASEAN, I think, in the middle of this year or if not next year. So in either 2025 or 2026. So you might think that, oh, okay, East Timor joining ASEAN is a good step. However, we've seen that East Timor has time and time again tried to apply for ASEAN for, I think, almost a decade or even more than a decade, and yet their accession has only been granted very recently, this year or next year. So I think this slow slow and not sort of conducive nature for ASEAN to expand may be a stumbling block. However, seeing as we know, Bangladesh compared to East Timor is way more economically developed. It has higher human capital compared to East Timor, and also has a lot more to offer. I don't see why not Bangladesh could join ASEAN. It's just, I think the only barrier would be sort of political dynamics and cultural dynamics. However, I think as a Malaysian, it would be beneficial for trade for both parties, and it will just raise the standard of living for both sides as opening businesses. The exchange of human capital will be way easier with Bangladesh in ASEAN.
Yeah, I think those are very important points that have been brought up. And I think now coming back to Malaysia and talking about Malaysia's innovation, I think that what we can see, even from Malaysia's point of view, is that economic growth needs to be done. And it can be one of the ways it could be done is collaboration with other countries. For example, the establishment of the Johor Singapore Special Economic Zone is an example of like regional cooperation. And by combining Singapore's capital and technological prowess with Johor's abundant land and labor, I think that zone would be able to attract billions in investment, create thousands of jobs, and spur high tech manufacturing. And I think that one of the things that Bangladesh, and I think one of the things that Malaysia is doing very good is the corporate investments that is being done in cutting edge technologies. For example, the YTL's powers 20.6 billion ringgit real deal with Nvidia to build Malaysia's fastest supercomputer demonstrates how local corporations are making bold moves into AI infrastructure. And this would not only propel Malaysia into the global digital arena, but also transfer high level technological expertise to the local workforce. And I think that similar investments are also reshaping the industrial landscape as companies upgrade their manufacturing processes with next generation computing and automation. I think that Khazana Nasional is also one of the examples to promote equity in Malaysia, which is actively restructuring its portfolio, such as recent moves to revitalize Malaysia Airlines, and support emerging local startups to ensure that the benefits of rapid economic growth are shared broadly among Malaysians. And this initiatives also aim to narrow income disparities while bolstering national champions. And I think that by channeling returns from high tech investments into social and community development projects, the government will be able to balance equity with growth. And I think that the major corporations also foster a very robust venture ecosystem. For example, major corporations like Petronas Ventures and Sunway Group are stepping into the venture capital arena by investing in innovative startups. And these corporate ventures, I think, are helping to nurture local talent and support disruptive technologies, ensuring that Malaysia's growth story includes homegrown success alongside multinational investments. And I think that as foreign giants build expensive data centers in Malaysia to serve global markets, I think the debates have obviously intensified over digital colonialism, where vast resource consumption, electricity, water might undermine local sustainability in Malaysia. For example, despite the promise of job creation, data centers typically generate only 30 to 50% of permanent jobs, while drawing heavily on local utilities. And I think that amid the ongoing US-China trade tensions, multinational semiconductor companies such as Infineon and Intel have expanded their operations in Malaysia, especially in Penang, capitalizing on the country's strategic location and stable business environment. And I think this friend shoring shift not only strengthens global supply chain business environments, but also creates technological transfer and local skills development in Malaysia. And I think that the programs in Malaysia, like the Dana Penjana Nasional, also illustrate how the government is matching public funds with private investments to provide critical early stage financing for startups and the SMEs. And I think that this model would help democratize access to capital and foster a more inclusive growth model, while also ensuring that innovation driven prosperity reaches a wider segment of the population. And so, based on all of this, I think that Malaysia is doing a lot when it comes to technology and innovation. But how do you think can Malaysia ensure that its push into high tech sectors such as data centers is aligned with environmental sustainability and resource management, especially in light of concerns with about water and energy shortages in Malaysia? Mr. Hyren, or Mr. Arif Malik, or Mr. Shazib Karim? Mr. Arif Malik, I see your hand is raised. Would you like to add anything?
Apologies. What exactly was the question? I think my internet cut off at the last part.
So, how do you think can Malaysia ensure that its push into high-tech sectors such as data centers is aligned with environmental sustainability and resource management, especially in light of concerns about energy and water shortages?
Oh, okay. Yeah, got it. So, yeah, I think it's a very interesting question that you asked because obviously, like in IB, one of the key economic concepts that we are dealing with constantly is sustainability and efficiency. Because if we are efficient, we really can't be sustainable enough. And if we are sustainable, we are not really efficient enough. And that's a conundrum, I think, that Malaysia and even other, like primarily Malaysia, will face. And are of, I think, regarding how Malaysia can like grow in a sustainable way. I think it's a really important question. But I think what it can do is invest in more renewable energy integration. For example, they can prioritize solar, hydro, and wind to power the data centers, as you were talking about. And if you think about it from a geographical perspective, Malaysia has the climate for solar farms. So incentivizing companies to use green power is the key here. Maybe even the government could back green energy contracts like the PPAs, which are often found in Norway's, and or even the government could subsidize the green energy contracts. Other than that, I think what it could also do in terms of water shortages is that data centers use a crazy amount of water, mainly for the cooling the servers. And Malaysia already faces seasonal water stress, and with climate change messing up the rainfall patterns, I think this problem's only gonna get worse. So building hundreds of water guzzling data centers without a plan could leave local communities struggling for water. So some of the solutions that off the top of my head that I can think of is, for example, the data centers could use advanced cooling systems. I think they could switch from the traditional water cool system to air cooled or liquid immersion cooling technologies, and these methods reduce water usage by around 90% compared to the older setups. And also, they could do recycled and gray water usage. Data centers should be required to use recycled wastewater for cooling instead of fresh drinkable water. And I think municipalities and data centers can partner on closed loop water systems. And another important thing that we could look at is the rain water harvesting. If I'm not mistaken, the Borneo rainforest, it's around the, I believe it's in the some of it is in the Malaysian territory. So they could do mandatory rainwater collection on the rainforest, and they could use that water to sort of sustain these data centers. But more importantly, all of these are just ideas. What really needs to be done is legislation. The government needs to get involved. So I think the government regulation what the government should do is cap water consumption per megawatt of data processing, and they should require public water audits from all the large scale centers. Additionally, I think the government they should also have emergency water reserves. For example, they could force operators to maintain on-site storage tanks as backup during drought periods, so they're not draining municipal supplies during shortages. And overall, I just think I just think if Malaysia ignores the water issue, it's risking public backlash, environmental damage, and long-term instability in the data center sector. But if it leads with the sustainable water management, I think Malaysia can definitely become a global model for eco-friendly data infrastructure. So based on that, I had a question for Mr. Hyren. So Hyren, do you think the Malaysian government do you think they're invested in terms of sustainability when it comes to like data centers, or even like in Bangladesh, for example, we are like heavily our climate change is gonna like it's already like it's like taking away some of our coastal areas. So government is like it's starting to get involved now, but it's too late. So do you think the Malaysian government has taken initiatives when it comes to like green economy and like sustainable way of economically dealing stuff?
Yes, thank you, Arif, for your question. I think the Malaysian government is aware of the problems of climate change, and there are some efforts that are government backed that are trying to alleviate, the climate change issues such as rising sea levels, global warming, and etc. Especially deforestation, because as both of you pointed out, Malaysia is an economy that is heavily reliant on the world's palm oil. I mean, yeah, the world's palm oil industry, right? They make a third of the world's palm oil, and they harvest a lot of it for export to many countries such as India, Bangladesh, and China to make other manufactured food products. So I think in that case, Malaysia itself is a very unique country because unlike Bangladesh, as I'm aware that in Bangladesh, the rising sea levels causes salinification of coastal areas, which makes raising livestock a bit harder. But in Malaysia, we are blessed to have a country that is devoid of any sort of major natural disaster, apart from maybe the occasional flood, right? The occasional seasonal monsoon flood. So, unlike Indonesia, Thailand, Myanmar, Cambodia, Malaysia does not have any earthquakes. It does not have any volcanoes. It doesn't really have cyclones. So, in as a country itself, it's very sheltered from the elements. So, in the sense, the government doesn't really have an incentive to sort of um, divest their energy into sustainability measures. However, there is a clear goal and clear policy through rhetoric. However, whether or not that's actually been done is a bit of a concern. However, I would also like to bring um, something of interest, which is Malaysia's palm oil industry, right? Because I think shifting away from data centers, Malaysia's palm oil industry is actually a really major part as well, and that can actually be also digitalized through through actually more effective palm oil harvesting methods using machinery, using other types of technology. So, in a sense, Malaysia itself is they're starting to develop their data centers. They need a lot of water, and that's just the start of um, Malaysia's transition to the digital economy. So, in in the sort of sustainability lens, Malaysia isn't really doing much in that sector as of yet. There is concerns by local economists and local politicians that these data centers will actually use too much energy of the state. For example, the Johor Singapore Special Economic Zone, right? They're planning on building data centers there. They're planning on building data centers in near Penang, near Kedah, that type of area in the north of Peninsula Malaysia. So there definitely is a concern. However, I don't think that's being prioritized or properly addressed at the moment. What actually is being addressed is the palm oil issue. So as we know, Western countries usually have anti-palm oil rhetoric, right? They claim that palm oil is inherently bad, unsustainable, and just not good for human health. Well, while there is some truth to that, however, palm oil isn't really all bad as the Western economies or the Western media says. Palm oil is actually one of the world's most sustainable types of vegetable oils, as it produces a relatively high yield per square foot or square acre compared to, let's say, rapeseed oil or other types of vegetable oil. So, palm oil harvesting itself is not the problem. However, it's the way it's harvested. So, we see unsustainable practices such as slash and burn and such as land clearing of indigenous habitats, such as for orangutans and other wildlife species. So, in regards to that, Malaysia is trying to stop this type of unsustainable practices. So, on one hand, in terms of the technological side with data centers, I don't think the government is doing as much as it should yet. However, on the other hand, with the palm oil sector, the Malaysian government has had a strong stance on what it has been doing and what it can do and what it hopes to do in the future, such as giving stricter enforcement, especially in Sarawak and Sabah near the Borneo rainforest areas, which are primarily vulnerable for exploitation since infrastructure there is less developed. So I think in those areas, the government is trying to step up enforcement through the help of regional partners of ASEAN, such as Brunei and Indonesia, to try to stop illegal logging, illegal burning, and all of these unsustainable practices. So there are two sides of the coin. And I think the Malaysian government is trying to balance that because on one hand it wants to pursue economic growth through the data centers, through the technological aspect that Araf and Arab has both mentioned. However, on the other hand, we see that Malaysia is trying to focus on sustainability on its industries that it has already been known for, such as the palm oil sector, right? So I think the Malaysian government is right now at a good position to increase their sustainability targets. However, it's not to say they're not doing a good job. They just need to do more.
Yeah, I'd agree with you totally there, and I think, like you mentioned before, Malaysia's rubber and palm oil industries depended heavily on manual labor, but however, with rising labor costs and worker shortages, industries are turning to mechanized harvesters, AI-driven monitoring systems, and even robotics. And these methods not only improve efficiency, but they also reduce waste and environmental damage as well. And I think another interesting point is another interesting development is in aquaculture, where smart fishing technologies like sonar tracking and automated feeding systems are making fish harvesting more efficient and sustainable. And I think like this also brings up the question of are these technological upgrades accessible to all farmers and harvesters, or are they just limited to large corporations, right? And I think that's something we could think about, because I see it as one of the biggest challenges for them in Malaysia, because while large agricultural firms have the capital to invest in these advancements, smallholder firms, farmers, and independent fishermen often struggle with the cost, and because it's really out of their budget. And I think that's where government incentives and foreign investment become critical, because programs that offer subsidized access to modern harvesting tools and training initiatives are helping bridge the gap between them.
Thank you, Mr. Hyren and Mr. Shazib and Mr. Arif, for those wonderful insights. I think, yes, a lot of things need to be done when it comes to innovation. And I think I agree with Mr. Hyren that Malaysia's government doesn't have an incentive to specifically focus on environment and the environmental aspect as much as other countries like Bangladesh does, because our country is heavily reliant, not reliant, but is heavily affected by climate change because of floods and other arenas. And I think we could also look at examples of other countries. For example, Singapore, which is Singapore's already created a very smart and innovation driven hub. And I think one of the reasons they were able to do that is because the government works have been working through bodies like Temasek Holdings and GIC to nurture high tech sectors and attract FDI. And the initiatives such as the development of smart city solutions and extensive digital infrastructure investments have transformed Singapore into a global financial and tech hub. And for example, the launch of specialized public-private partnerships and the creation of dedicated innovation zones, such as Police, I think it's called, have sparked breakthroughs in R&D and supported local startups. Obviously, Singapore it cannot be used as example for all countries in the world, because it's a country, although it has a sizable population for its size, it's a very small country when it comes to land area, and it doesn't have a lot of people. It has a lot of people for its land area size, but it doesn't have a lot of people in compared to countries like Bangladesh. We have 160 million people, so that's a lot of people. And but we can also look at other countries, for example, South Korea, which has been aggressive in R&D and high-tech manufacturing. For example, South Korea's success in semiconductors and electronics is driven by substantial government initiatives in R&D, infrastructure, and export credit guarantees. And companies like Samsung and SK Hynix have benefited from policies that support domestic innovation, enabling them to compete globally. And the nation's ability to rapidly commercialize advanced technologies while maintaining strict quality standards serve as a model for integrating innovation with industrial growth. And I think also Taiwan could be an example. For example, Taiwan is a global leader in semiconductor, and Taiwan's semiconductor ecosystem, which are led by giants such as TSMC, is bolstered by close collaboration between governments, academia, and private enterprises. And the robust policy frameworks, the tax incentives, and a focus on skills training have also allowed Taiwan to establish itself as a backbone of the global semiconductor supply chain. And I think we could also look at China. China is a country that has rapidly advanced its tech industries by deploying state-driven policies that promote growth in semiconductor manufacturing, AI, and other innovative areas. And the initiatives like the Made in China 2025 has focused on self-sufficiency and technological leadership, which are obviously heavily funded by state support. And I think we could also look at examples in the EU and Germany. For example, the EU's Horizon Europe program funds extensive research and innovation across member states, and which emphasize sustainable development and digital transformation. And also we know about Germany, which is an industrial leader, and which combines robust R&D investments with policies that prioritize energy efficiency and environmental standards. And also these efforts have helped Europe and Germany as a whole to be a competitive manufacturing base, while ensuring that growth benefits society and minimizes environmental impacts. And I think now talking about equity, I'm very much interested by equity, because in our country right now in Bangladesh, one of the reasons we had a very massive government change and a very revolutionary spirit in the past few months is because we currently also don't, but we also didn't have a very equitable society in the past. But I think Malaysia has been trying to be a little equitable in their nature. For example, one of the things that we talked about is the Khazanah Nasional, which acts as a sovereign wealth fund that only invests in strategic sectors, but also channels returns into social and public development projects. And the EPF, which is the Employees Provident Fund in Malaysia, also has investments approach that support both the financial support security of Malaysian workers and broader economic development by funding local enterprises. So, how do you think like countries like Malaysia can be more equitable for their people? And how do you think like also like us, how Bangladesh and countries like Malaysia, Bangladesh, and how other countries in the world can be more equitable in your opinion, Mr. Arif Malik, Mr. Hyren, or Mr. Shazi?
Yeah, I could start about Malaysia and equity, and I think yeah, either Arab or Shazib can continue on how it relates to Bangladesh, because yeah, I don't have much experience with Bangladesh. Anyways, I think yeah, Araf, you're right about how equity is a very important part of any economy, because ultimately, when an economy grows, what is most important is that the people are doing well, right? They have a sustainable, government. They see a good future. They have high wages, and I think that's the most important part of any sort of country building, any sort of country development. So in that case, Malaysia, compared to let's say like 20, 30, or even like 40 years ago, is doing very well in the sense that everyone is having a great standard of living right now. Although it's not to the level of Singapore, it is still one of the higher, one of the richer nations in Southeast Asia. I think its GDP per capita is only second or third to either Brunei and Singapore or some other country. But I think I think Malaysia has the third largest GDP per capita in ASEAN, behind Singapore and Brunei. So I think that is a very important distinction to make. And you see the Malaysian middle class really starting to rise, right? In Malaysia, there are three types of like the socioeconomic classes are divided into three types. So there's the B40, which is the lower 40% of um, income earners in Malaysia. There's the M40, which is the middle 40% of income earners in Malaysia. And there is the T20. So the T20 signifies the top 20 income earners in Malaysia, top 20%. So all of these numbers are in percent. So how the government usually implements policy decisions is by using these metrics, either the B40, the M40, and T20. So these are sort of economic metrics the governments can use to sort of implement their policy decisions. I think um, right now the Malaysian government should actually transition onto a more needs-based approach rather than a racial approach, because um, no, I think Araf mentioned this in his introduction. The new economic policy was a policy that was conceived after the racial riots in Malaysia, right, in the 1960s, in that era. So after the racial riots, Tun Razak, who was the second prime minister of Malaysia, decided to come up with the new economic policy, which was essentially meant to be a 20-year policy, meant to actually increase Bumi Putra, or essentially ethnically Malay involvement in the economy of Malaysia. So, just to give you a bit of context, before the new economic policy in Malaysia, there was a ratio of 2.4, 33, and 63 in terms of economic ownership with economic ownership of Malaysia. So this means that only 2.4% of all economic holdings were owned by Malays, 33% were owned by ethnically Chinese, and 63% were owned by foreigners, such as the British or other colonial parties. So the new economic policy actually aimed to reduce this ratio into a more equitable 30-40-30 ratio. So with Malays owning 30% instead of the existing 2.4%. So on paper, this seems like an exceptional idea. You have increased equity of different races. You have increased involvement of the ethnically Malay population in the economy, and this will actually boost overall economic growth. However, on paper, even though it sounded good, in reality, this vision of a 30-40-30 ratio of ethnic ownership did not really bear fruit. And in reality, the new economic policy wasn't that effective, and instead fostered a greater culture of actually corruption and greater culture of reliance on the state instead of the free market economy. So I think in regards to that, right now, Malaysia is not equitable, not in the fact of economy, because compared to most other countries in the region, Malaysia is doing quite well um, for its regional scope. However, Malaysia itself, as domestically through an ethnic lens and through a political lens, is not equitable at all, as the new economic policies essentially, which favor the ethnically Malay populace, is still implemented, and that disadvantages honest and hardworking ethnic minorities in Malaysia to go into the business sector. So I think something needs to change in regards with the affirmative action and race-based policies of the new economic plan or new economic policy, because they tried to rectify the ratio and they tried to rectify the issue regarding ethnic minority ownership, and that has not worked. So I think in 2018, actually, with the election of Mahathir for a second term back into parliament, back as prime minister, he actually floated the idea of changing the race-based affirmative action in favor of the Malays, the new economic policy, into one of a more needs-based approach, regardless of race and religion. So I think that is a step Malaysia should move towards, and move away from race-based policies, as stated through the new economic policy, into something more substantive and something more widely encompassing of different races and different religions, so that not only can Malaysia's economy grow and grow equitably and grow sustainably, but everyone in Malaysia, regardless of race and religion, can actually live together harmoniously and not have existing social and political tension, which is what is happening right now. So I think through economic inclusion policies of races and religions, instead of the current affirmative action, Malaysia's economy can actually grow and equity can actually improve. Yeah, so Shazib, Arab, any comments on how Bangladesh can mirror the situation or just have any takeaways from Malaysia and develop their own economy?
Mr. Shazib, I see your hand is raised. Would you like to add anything?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I'd like to say thank you for your insights, and they're really insightful. And I think, like, in Malaysia, like you said, just adding on, I think, mm, in Malaysia, there's something that I was reading. I think it's pronounced Bumi Putera policies, which aim to address historical inequalities, but sometimes limit opportunities for the non-Bumi Putera communities. And I think, like, I think, like, this could also relate to Bangladesh as well, because Bangladesh faces income inequality between urban elites and rural workers, and I think the income inequality is massive. And but Bangladesh has also tried to tackle it through microfinance, through the Grameen Bank, and also other entrepreneurship programs. And I think also that Malaysia could expand its own inclusive financial support systems for low income groups as well. And I think, um on another problem was the healthcare situation. Like, in Malaysia, in Malaysia, public healthcare quality varies between urban and rural areas, and private healthcare is expensive, which leads to inequality in medical access. And Bangladesh has also suffered from similar issues, as Bangladesh has used telemedicine services and community-based health initiatives to improve healthcare in rural areas. And I think this is a model that Malaysia could adapt themselves, for the development as well. And we were also talking about this before, about like the environmental degradation, and how, like, on Malaysia, wealth from palm oil, rubber, and fisheries industries is not always fairly distributed. And, like, Bangladesh is also very vulnerable to environmental challenges. Like, recently there was a flood that had occurred, which had impacted a lot of families, especially in the rural areas. And I think this is also invested in resilient agriculture and renewable energy. And and Bangladesh is also trying to adapt solar energy and climate adaptive agriculture initiatives, which Malaysia can also follow. And overall, I'd say that, like, both Malaysia and Bangladesh are at pivotal moments in the development. And while Malaysia has a more diverse and high income economy than Bangladesh, Bangladesh is also developing more inclusive financial programs, skill building initiatives, and also grassroots development strategies, which like offer lessons which Malaysia can also adapt. And I think, to for Malaysia to build a truly equitable Malaysia, they can, like, focus on some policies on, like, fair access to education, healthcare, and job opportunities, sustainability and shared economic benefits, and also, like, an inclusive financial models like microfinance and SME support. And yeah, I think, like, by balancing innovation, investment, and social equity, Malaysia can ensure that all its people, regardless of the location, ethnicity, or income level, can benefit from national progress.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with Shazib over there, and I think yeah, just to add some statistics and some historical perspective as well, like Malaysia and like pretty much all of the world. I think even North Korea to some extent. All of us follow like a capitalist economy, and even like 200 years ago, or like 200-300 years ago, Marx himself admitted that there is gonna be a sort of a battle between the proletariats, who are the working class, and the bourgeoisie, who are sort of the elite. So I think that's where the problem in equity comes in. Obviously, there are the one of the beautiful things, and one of the most not so beautiful things about capitalism is that it allows people to grow, but obviously there are going to be some inequality. For example, like me and Araf and like Shaz, we were talking about the Thomas Piketty, and how that income inequality in the US has risen, actually, even though it was declining in the 70s after President Reagan's 2 terms and his Reaganomics period, essentially how the income inequality sort of went up again. So I think it's a universal problem, not just limited to Malaysia or Bangladesh. I think one key strategy to achieve equity is, in my opinion, through looking at through the lens of Scandinavian countries who are sort of socialists. For example, they invest in quality education for all. They ensure universal healthcare access, and they also ensure climate justice and gender equality and fair political representation. So I think one of the ways we could do that is through, first of all, investing in free education for all. Globally, I believe there are over 200 million children who are out of school, according to UNESCO. I think I was reading it somewhere, with most of them in low income countries like Bangladesh and other countries in the Sahel and sub-Saharan Africa. Uh, as for Malaysia, I believe the rural dropout rates are double that of urban areas. So there's clearly some work that needs to be done. So I think one of the solutions that we could do is the government should subsidize early childhood education, rural internet, and vocational skill training for low skilled workers. Additionally, as for universal healthcare access, one of the problems with people are all around the world is that like they cannot achieve proper healthcare. Like 50% of people lack access to essential healthcare, and that was according to the WHO recently. So definitely, if I'm not mistaken, in Malaysia there are private hospitals who serve approximately 1/3 of the population, but they absorb 70% of the specialists, leaving public hospitals crowded. And one of the solution is that the government in Bangladesh or Malaysia and other parts of the world, they could increase government health spending from 2% to like more percentage of the GDP to close urban rural health gaps. And they could also implement mobile clinics and telemedicine for remote areas. I think in Bangladesh, one of the biggest issues that we have is that we don't have enough hospitals. However, with telemedicine and mobile clinics, we're actually able to reach to remote communities. For example, in the Sundarbans or in the Cox's Bazar region. And obviously, this is not gonna bridge the wealth gap, but this is gonna make sure that people receive the right to live, the right to healthcare, all of the universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I think from the lens of the Scandinavian countries, I think they're really doing a good job, even though the taxes there are extremely high. But the people, if we look at the happiness index, majority of if I'm not mistaken, most of the countries, if we look, it's a common pattern. It's all the Scandinavian countries. And why is that? It's because the government has decided to implement sort of a socialist policy in which people have a place to live, they have a place to eat, they have a place to go, education sort of free. So I think this sort of goes on to show how if the government actually invest in people, the people, because human beings, we won't protest if we have a plate to eat. And that's essentially what happened in Bangladesh. It's a student revolution with what happened essentially, because the students themselves couldn't get a job because all the job market was saturated, and obviously they didn't have enough food to eat. So what they did, they essentially overthrew the government. And that's not the case in Bangladesh. That's cases in other parts of the world. For example, Arab Spring. Why did the Arab Spring happen? Because of the rampant inequality. So I think one of the ways equity can be achieved is definitely through investment in people. And I think government should allocate more percentage of the GDP towards the betterment of the people. I think Bhutan actually measures, it doesn't measure its GDP in terms of wealth. It measures the GDP through happiness. And even though I think it's not sort of applicable in a capitalist world that we live in, ultimately I think the government all around the world should focus more on the happiness of the civilians rather than just economic output.
Yeah, I think that those were very interesting opinions that were shared. And I think to conclude our discussion, I think we should talk a little bit about the crossroads of Malaysia when it comes to innovation, investment, and the quest for equity, and concluding in that manner. So I think that Malaysia stands at a pivotal juncture balancing robust technological investments while the imperative of equitable growth. In 2024, the nation achieved a record $85.8 billion in approved investments, marking a 14.9% increase from the previous year, driven by significant digital investments from major tech companies. And I think to ensure these investments benefit all societal segments, Malaysia has implemented various initiatives. And I think that the Khazanah Nasional Impact in Innovation Challenge KIIC, organized by Khazanah via its Dana Impact, is a business competition designed to discover and support new business models. And I think that that will be able to facilitate strategic value creation aimed at advancing Malaysia. However, like all countries in the world, obviously challenges are going to be there. For example, the OECD highlights that despite Malaysia's rapid economic and inclusive growth over 4 decades, income and wealth inequality remain relatively high, with the GDP coefficient on par with the US and 40% greater than Nordic economies. However, Nordic economies are one of the world's most equitable economies in the world. Additionally, the World Bank emphasizes the need for Malaysia to build on its progress to ensure that everyone benefits, especially as it transitions to high income status between 2028 and 2030. And in summary, Malaysia's journey at its crossroads, in my opinion, involves not only fostering innovation and attracting investments, but also ensures that these developments lead to inclusive and equitable growth for all its citizens. So, do you think that's a conclusion that all of you would agree with?
Yeah, I would agree with that conclusion.
Yes, definitely. I do agree with that. Even as a Malaysian, I think, yeah, thank you, Ara, for wrapping this podcast up very succinctly and clearly. I think, um, Malaysia is a country poised for greatness, poised for both economic and just greatness in terms of the standard of living for the citizens, right? For its citizens. So I think as long as Malaysia continues to leverage its special position within Southeast Asia, within um, the world as well, and within the sphere of developing middle income countries, I think Malaysia can go a long way, especially if um, institutional barriers and stuff like corruption does not hinder such economic progress in the future.
Thank you, everyone, for your agreements, and thank you, Mr. Hyren, for that concluding statement. And I think that's the end of episode 37, Malaysia at the Crossroads: Innovation, Investment, and the Quest for Equity with Mr. Hyren. And Mr. Hyren, are there any final words that you would like to say about the podcast or about the topic or anything in general before we depart for today?
Yes, thank you for first of all, thank you, the three of you guys, for inviting me to this podcast. It's been a joy, and I've been delighted to share my insight in regards to Malaysia's economic growth, the relationship with Bangladesh, and how both countries can actually leverage this position to grow together. And I think if emerging economies across the world just come together and form partnerships in the face of this polarizing world order. With you see the United States, Russia, China, these three major players, as well as Europe, just having increased tension and friction right now, especially with ongoing political crises. I think the emerging economies and the developing countries should actually band together and work together in order to advocate for equitable and strong economic cooperation. So I think, yeah, thank you guys for this podcast. It's been amazing, and I hope for the best for the rest of your episodes.
Thank you, Mr. Haran, for that concluding statement. We really appreciate that. And thank you to the audience for listening to today's podcast. Today was episode 37, Malaysia, the Crossroads: Innovation, Investment, and the Quest for Equity with Mr. Haran. And thank you to the audience again for listening to our podcast discussion for today. And we hope to see you next week with another very interesting topic and with another very interesting guest speaker. Thank you and goodbye for now.